This is Women Talking Mitzvot, brought to you by the Stella K. Abraham Migdal Oz Women's Beit Midrash as part of its commitment to bringing women's spiritual worlds into halachic discourse. A Jewish wedding is one of life's most joyous and meaningful moments, filled with beautiful rituals, ancient traditions, and profound spiritual ideas. In this episode, we explore the many different aspects of a traditional Jewish wedding and consider how they help lay the foundation for a lifelong partnership built on holiness, commitment, and love. This episode has been sponsored by Lisa Wilner in memory of her grandfather, Meir Yosef ben Avraham, her first chavruta and her role model for weaving Torah learning into everyday life.
Hi, Yosefa.
Hi, Shayna.
I am very excited about this episode because for a while now, I have really felt that it would be helpful if there is a podcast that an engaged couple could listen to together that covers all those things that you really need to know about the wedding day and how things transpire that no one ever really sits you down and goes through with you. And I'm not referring now to like the great checklists that are out there that help you remember what you need to bring to the wedding hall or all the things that you have to have in mind the day of the wedding, but rather a podcast that really runs through what actually happens at the wedding from the beginning to the end, and like what's halacha, what's minhag, what's neither of those, what things have to be done in a certain set way, and where there's flexibility. And I thought that this could be a conversation where we discuss those topics and talk them through so that it could be a resource for couples that are out there.
Totally. Look, even our previous episode, which really delved more into the mechanics of how Jewish marriage works, and this episode, we're going to sort of do a run through of the day, as you said, and sort of more the spiritual aspects and the actual ceremonial aspects of what happens. I know that as a madrichat kalot, I do not cover this with my couples. There is a lot that we have to fit into those sessions, and this is not one of them. And I always kind of like have a little fetch in my heart. I'm like, is someone going to tell them? Are they going to read it somewhere? Like, I don't necessarily even say to them.
Well, the Kedushin, discuss this with them.
So
sometimes yes, sometimes no.
Exactly. Usually ask them, like, did you meet with them? Did you have a run through of the day? But even in that meeting, they can't go through all these pieces. It's too much, I think, even for that. So I'm really happy to also be able to have this as a resource, be able to send my English-speaking couples to go listen to.
So I actually want to go back and start with the week before the wedding, because there's a minhag for a chatan and a kala not to see each other in person during that week. And some think it's for the full 7 days leading up to the wedding, and some think that it's the Shavua Shechalbo starting just from the beginning of that actual calendar week, like from that Saturday night till the wedding. This minhag is rooted in a concern that the excitement and the anticipation and the intense desire that a kala feels in lead up to the wedding could actually perhaps cause some uterine bleeding, which is referred to in halacha as dam chimud, blood of desire, which we obviously want to prevent because we want to make sure that a kala could come to her wedding tahora, ritually pure. The whole practice, though, is a minhag, because this is not like a concern that, we are super worried will actually transpire. And therefore, even those who follow the minhag should know that if there's some significant reason why they need to see each other that week, like sometimes they need to sign in an apartment that week, or maybe they're in therapy together and it's really important that they have that session, or maybe they need to run an important errand. In those kinds of cases, it would be permissible for them to see each other. I have found that there's sometimes a misconception that this minhag also applies to talking over the phone. It definitely does not. So even though over the last few years, maybe you've seen this also, there's been this trend for couples not to talk at all the week before the wedding, or not to WhatsApp, basically not to be in communication the week before the wedding. Some people find that this really adds an element of extra anticipation and excitement, and some feel that it also, like at a very stressful time, just like gives them the space to like take a breath and maybe focus instead on their family and on their friends in the lead up to the wedding. But I don't want couples to think that this is something that they have to do, or that if they want to speak, that there's something not typical or not normal about that. This is not at all part of the minhag. So if a couple wants to do it and it's their choice and it feels good for them, that's great. But this should not at all become some kind of community standard. And especially because I feel, and this was my experience, that like in the week leading up to the wedding, sometimes the only person who could really like be with you and help you feel calm and help you feel good and balanced is the person who in a minute is going to become your spouse. And I want people to feel that if that is something that's important for them and they want to be able to talk to their fiance during this time period, that they're able to. And I'll also just share that Rav Moshe Feinstein, who was a very big pusik, really considered a Gadol Hador in the 20th century in America, he himself felt that this is a minhag that does not have such a strong basis. And therefore, if it's going to cause any kinds of inconvenience, he did not think that the bride and groom should hesitate from seeing each other. And on that basis, he even thought that it's totally permitted for a couple, if they want, to take pictures together and to see each other before the wedding ceremony actually occurs. And I don't know what you guys did at your wedding, but going back to when I got married, which is 24 years ago, it was already becoming more and more common then, and now I think it's very common in many places in America, that we took all our wedding pictures before, meaning we got to the wedding hall. That was the first time that we saw each other after a week of not seeing each other. And we took all of our pictures with our family and grandparents and cousins and aunts and uncles. And then after the yichud room, as opposed to all the guests needing to wait for an hour because they're busy taking so many pictures, and then people end up eating a little bit and dancing, but then leaving pretty early before the main course. In this case, if you take a lot of the pictures beforehand, then after the yichud room, we just took, a few of the more intimate pictures. And that's something that I think a lot of people have leaned into, even though in Israel I see that it is not mainstream at all. Meaning, and it's not just mainstream, it's people react what? Why would I want to do that? The kisei kala, the bedekin, is considered such a huge moment of the first time that they're seeing each other, that people don't want to give up on that. But on the flip side, I think that, sometimes it means that afterwards the dancing doesn't end up being very full, or people leave. So there's pluses and minuses to both of these, but it's always important for me to clarify what here is a must and what here is a minhag, and what here there is where there is flexibility.
Shana, before we were researching this episode, I actually had no idea that the whole taking pictures before the wedding thing even was part of the halachic conversation. I didn't know that it was even there. And so I just thought and I never see it in Israel. That's true. And I also I got married in Israel and I didn't do that. And I just thought okay, there are people who put more of an emphasis on the procedure. So we want the procedure to go smoothly. So we'll do that before, but giving up a nice minhag there, I didn't realize that there was even conversation about that. And that's good to know. I just will say on a personal level, we didn't take pictures for very long because we were very conscious of the fact that people were sitting and waiting. And so we did it very briefly. So that was, I guess, our solution to it. I think one other piece that's important to bring up before the wedding is, of course, the mikvah itself, right? The mikvah, we have both on the female side and the male side. On the female side, it's a halachic obligation. It's different than on the male side. And in that sense, a woman needs to go to the mikveh to be able to get married and be permissible to her husband, to be permissible to one another. She is a nida and has to exit that status in order to
Meaning any woman that at some point has had a menstrual period is in the nida status.
Is nida status, and in order to emerge from that, she would have to go to the mikveh. And so we have the process of going through the 7 clean days, and ideally we go to the mikveh within 4 days of the wedding, and that is going back to what you mentioned before about the idea of dam chimud, meaning we don't want there to be a long period of time between that and when she gets married, lest there be some sort of bleeding of that kind. And it's really important at this already way before the wedding itself, to be in contact with a kala teacher or yotzar halacha. Some physicians are also very good at this, right? Who understand the way that these elements get scheduled. I'm leaving that very open because there's a lot of different kinds of ways that couples can sometimes like to be scheduling this period of their time.
But it is good that the minute somebody knows that they're headed towards marriage, even if they're not officially or formally engaged, it's a good conversation to start having.
Exactly. So that's definitely something that's important. And I'll also just say that in terms of the actual mikveh immersion, it's also quite a difference between Israel and America, lefachot, that in America there is a preference for daytime immersion for kalas. Yeah. I'm not exactly sure why, by the way. I know why it's allowed. I know why we're allowed.
Meaning, why do people prefer that? Because it's so nice. You go and it's private and you're there by yourself with your mom and the mikveh lady, and it's not in the middle of all these other women who are there on a regular night.
Okay.
I think it's that.
So
America, pristine and nice.
So in Israel, the women are going in the evening. It's run by the Rabbanut. It can be open during the day. There are many, many reasons why mikveh is open during the day in Israel. And that definitely could happen. But the general procedure is that the women go to the mikveh at night. night. Many mikvot do have a kala suite, or some of them have a kala suite, or a very nice room that they also try and give them. And of course, another big difference here is not in terms of geographic location, but also different cultures. Meaning, Sephardi culture has a lot more mikvah celebration. They might have a big party, right? It's much more public, a big reception there. Whereas in the Ashkenazi world, it's less so. It's sort of more private in that kind of gathering. And I think that it's also significant to say that, well, of course, a woman is going to the mikvah because of what we said, because of being a nida, but there are also many other ideas that kind of surround this particular mikvah immersion as well. It's also really a kind of cleansing, and there's a comparison of the wedding day to a kind of like a Yom Kippur, and we say vidui also on the wedding day as well at mincha. So that also is an element of the immersion that happens on the male side, where we also have a very strong minhag that the men go to the mikvah on the morning of their wedding, as also a gesture of maybe even tshuva, or also a sort of like cleansing in that kind of way.
Purification.
A purification or an atonement, all these different kinds of words that can be understood and meaningful in that context. And also to a certain degree, it's kind of like a nod to the halachic immersion that the woman is having. Also, likrat, the ability to be intimate with one another and permissible. And I'll just add one other piece, which is that some, both men and women, sometimes use this opportunity to, once they are already pure and post-immersion, to go to Rabbi in Israel, that they'll go up to the Temple Mount, which some find very meaningful to do, a day or two before their wedding, and some maybe less so. Of course, if anyone is looking or interested in that, it's always significant to consult a trusted halachic authority, someone who has experience in this realm, to make sure that they're doing that with the proper guidelines. But that's something that also does sometimes happen here in Israel.
Yeah, going up to Rabbi can be something very special and meaningful for those who, really think that that's a beautiful way to enter into marriage. Along the lines of what you were saying before about the connections between the wedding day and Yom Kippur, there's a very strong Ashkenazi minhag for a couple getting married to fast on their day of the wedding. If, though, it is a festive day, then there is a minhag not to fast. So if it's Rosh Chodesh, if it's Chanukah, if it's Isru Chag, which is the day after Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot, Tu B'Av and Tu B'Shvat are examples where we would not fast. And then there are other days where there's no tachanun that is said, but still many authorities think that you should still fast, such as days in the month of Nisan, Lag BaOmer, the few days between Rosh Chodesh and Shavuot, or the days between Yom Kippur and Sukkot. Whereas there's other authorities who think, no, if we're not saying tachanun, that's enough of a reason not to fast.
So
you
took
didn't
an ad
fast
on that
at all.
one.
Yeah, and I got married on Nisan Mark at 11:30 in the morning, so the fasting was not a big deal. There are Sephardim, though, who do not have this minhag of fasting at all, and they don't fast on the day of the wedding, no matter what day it is, even if it's like a regular, run-of-the-mill day of the week. The reason, though, that there is this Ashkenazi minhag to fast is along the lines of what you said. There's two reasons. The first is that we really think of the wedding day as a day of personal repentance. A couple's about to enter into this new stage of life and set up a home together, and they're offered like a fresh start of sorts. That's how I think about it. When we enter into marriage, it's almost as if we're being created for a second time, like we're being created anew, but this time with our other half as a more complete creation. And this may be the reason, actually, that two of the Sheva Brachot, which we'll speak about later, bless Hashem as Yotzer Ha'adam, as the creator of the creator of humanity. Because when we find our partner, it's as if we're returning to that original state of Zachar Unekeva Bara Otam, that Hashem originally created, Adam and Chava, or this male and female being together. And as we begin this new stage of life, we reflect on where we've been until now, and we engage in cheshbon hanefesh, and we do a personal accounting and take stock and do tshuva and kind of ask Hashem to forgive and absolve us of past mistakes, I think, as we move forward. And therefore, there's all these elements that we'll keep coming back to around the wedding that really see this day as a personal Yom Kippur. So whether it's the fasting, or there's also a minhag to say the mincha of Erev Yom Kippur that we say that has the al chetz at the end and the whole vidui. So to say that in the last tefillah before you go to the chuppah. So that's one explanation for why we fast. But there's another one that's brought down in the Sefer Tashbetz, who says that every wedding is in some way a reenactment of Matan Torah, meaning Hashem and Bnei Israel entered into a covenant, and now we, man and woman, husband and wife, are also entering into a marriage covenant. And just as Bnei Israel fasted that day, so too we also fast before our weddings. But because all of this is a minhag and not a halachic obligation if someone knows about themselves that they do not fast well. They are not going to feel well. They get big headaches. They are weak, and they're not going to be able to enter into their wedding in a positive, strong place. So Rav Melamed, as an example, in Pninei Halacha, writes that, of course, they could eat what they need to. If they feel like they could fast until Chatzot, until midday, that's great. But if not, and they feel like they can't fast at all, so then they could eat whatever's needed. They shouldn't overindulge in food. It shouldn't be like a day, of eating a ton, or they shouldn't be drinking alcoholic beverages. But it's important that they know that that's okay if that's what's needed. And also, I just want to clarify for those people that do fast, that the fast only goes until the end of the chuppah. So if you're getting married in America on a Sunday afternoon, or if you're getting married in Israel on a Friday morning or something like that, you don't need to think about fasting the whole day. And even if you're getting married at night, there are many poskim who think that the fast ends with Seit HaKol Chavim. So if you're getting married after that, and let's say the winter, right? The winter time when many weddings are like 6:30, but the day ends at 5 or whatever, you could definitely feel comfortable eating after the stars come out. I think what's most important here, and what it's really trying to get at, is that a chatan and a kala take a moment to really reflect and think about the mindset with which they want to enter into this new stage of life. And therefore, it's really like the cheshbon hanefesh and the reflection and the tshuva piece that is most important here. Or some people also have the minhag to give or to pledge some tzedakah. And if you can't fast, you don't, need to worry that somehow that's going to detract in any way.
Yeah, totally. I think also what's already coming through in a lot of this is the idea that it's really important to know what's minhag and what kind of minhag, so that we can also be able to make wise choices, so that we could preserve what ultimately we need to happen on that day, and we could be, able to be present for that. I think that's a really important piece. I think that from here, in terms of the way that the wedding develops, we have a reception. Now, not in the way that we use that word in English, right? Well, in a minute, we'll give it the name, what we give at a wedding itself. The Kabbalat Panim, right? We have a Kabbalat Panim.
Or the Shmorg.
Exactly. And it may be that this idea is sort of a remnant of an era when the Kala would receive guests in her home. Again, this is not recently, but receive guests in her home before really being escorted to the ceremony. But now really everything's taking on a life of its own, right? So in our versions today, this is kind of taken on sort of its own form, right? We have many times women will sit in a kisei kala, sort of a very decorated kind of monarchical chair, maybe with a lot of flowers, and flanked by, female family members and friends. And it could be at this time that women are giving brachot. But yes, part of that idea about being purified is also this idea that the chatan and kala are a shaliach, basically, they're a messenger for the tefillot of others, that they can somehow form as a channel through which to give brachot. And so sometimes those brachot are being given. They're receiving brachot from the people who come and want to bless them at the beginning of their wedding. And this can be a really, really meaningful interaction for women. But it's also really important to remember that there is no halachic requirement to sit in that chair, meaning if that's not what's comfortable necessarily, or that's not where the woman wants to be, then they don't have to. There are women who choose to do something that are more parallel to what often happens at this time at the sort of chasan's tish, or the tish chatan. So there's some women who choose to do that themselves. I will say honestly, I did that. You did also. Sitting in this chair. I did it briefly. I did a tish, and then I afterwards sat in the chair to be, yotze for what most women would do. And there could be anything we wanted. There could be singing. There could be divrei Torah. I had a friend speak at the tish that I had. I personally made a siyum, right? Similar things we might see also at the tish of the chatan. So those two things might be happening in parallel, right? So those two sort of like split screen moments where they still haven't yet.
As a woman, you typically walk into a wedding, you're like, where are all the men? The men are at the chasan's tish. They're in a different room.
Exactly. And two other, I think, really important things sometimes happen at the tish of the chatan. In some Ashkenazi communities, there's a document called the Tanaim, or the Tanaim, okay, which means conditions of engagement. And this document sometimes is read out loud and signed at the chatan's tish. Now, what is this document? Now, this agreement, essentially what it would do is outline sort of mutual commitments that are made by each of the families for this marriage that's happening. This agreement used to be, I would say, especially important in a world where Kiddushin could be performed long before the Nisuin, right? And a lot of things could happen in between those, right? Chas v'chila, Chatan could disappear, somebody could pass away, like meaning that there were stipulations that were set out to make sure that would be, there would be an understood agreement about how they would proceed from there. And so this agreement, you could read more about it. It's took on many different forms over the centuries, and some of them were written and signed at different points. But it did have a very significant legal function. Those who do sign them at the wedding today often, as I said, do it at the tish of the chatan. It's read aloud by anyone the couple wishes to honor. It doesn't matter who reads it. And then it's signed by two witnesses. And after that, there has to be a formal act of kinyan, which we mentioned in our previous episode.
And in Israel, they typically break the plate at the engagement party, even though they don't sign the tanaim.
Yeah, that part has lasted, exactly. Yes. Even though they don't know what the document is.
But
at
American weddings, the mothers are called at some point, and that's where they are.
Exactly. The other significant piece that happens oftentimes at the tish of the chatan, but not only, is a signing of the ketubah, which needs to take place with two witnesses. It could be either earlier on, even before the chasan's tish, just at the reception, the kabbalat panim at the tish, or even under the chuppah. Sometimes it really depends on the custom, or sometimes it's the preference of the Mesader Kiddushin. There's different elements that go into that decision. But it would have to be signed under the chuppah. I just want to mention this as an interesting piece. It would have to be signed under the chuppah in a case where the chuppah is after Tzedek Kochavim, and it's the next day, meaning they wouldn't be able to sign it if the tish was before and the chuppah is afterwards. So that's sometimes one of the reasons why it ends up getting signed under the chuppah.
Yeah. One of the things that I experience very differently at Israeli weddings is that the kisei kala at Israeli weddings, before the chatan comes, just when the kala is sitting in that chair, is like a very lively space. There's a lot of singing and a lot of dancing. It's almost like a whole round of dancing happens there before the actual whole wedding has even started.
If I can't go to a whole wedding, Shayna, like that's the part I want to go for.
Right.
Do you know what I'm saying? Like, I don't want to miss it.
And usually we'll get to dance with the kala there.
They dance, they sweat. Do you understand that? They sweat
and they sing, and there's musical instruments, and the kala's friends and her sisters, and it's like a really big deal. In America, at least when I got married, it was very formal, and it was a lot of people coming over, and really wonderful and beautiful to see everyone. But exactly for that reason, I wanted to have a kala's tish before, which wasn't standard, but I basically invited my friends to come 45 minutes before the time on the invitation, and I wanted to sit and sing with them and share Divrei Torah and have that intimacy that I think sometimes happens at the chatan's tish, and also that spiritual, I guess, experience that wasn't part of it. But I see in Israel it's kind of like all mixed together. One other thing that also I think is important to talk about when we're talking about documents, since we mentioned the Tanaim and we mentioned the Ketubah, is that in America, in the Orthodox, the modern Orthodox communities that we grew up in, it's really become the standard to sign a prenuptial agreement at some point, either before the wedding, like in the weeks and months leading up to the wedding, or sometimes at the beginning of the wedding, or at least even if you signed it before, to maybe announce or write on the program that you've signed it, because this is a way of our community enforcing kind of a standard that hopefully will become completely mainstream and widespread. And the RCA, the Rabbinical Council of America, rabbis who are part of that organization, which is most rabbis in the modern Orthodox community, they won't marry a couple who has not signed one, and they, together with the Beit Din of America, have a very specific version that they promote. And the primary purpose of this document is really to help prevent situations of get refusal, to help prevent situations of aguna, where one spouse, often the husband, but not only, refuses to participate in the giving or the receiving of a Jewish divorce. And therefore, there was a lot of work and effort put into this document, which was developed in the 1990s by some prominent rabbis. So that would be a document that's both halachically and legally sound. And the way that it works, and it's important to understand this, is that the prenup is not structured as a penalty for refusing to give a get. Because if that was the case, then that would be highly problematic, because we have a concept in halacha called a get museh, a get that was improperly coerced, and that isn't necessarily a kosher get. So instead, what this does is it creates a legally enforceable arbitration agreement under secular law, where there's a binding commitment also through the halacha to appear before a designated Beit Din once a couple has decided that they're headed, towards divorce. And this way, if there's a situation where a husband or a wife is not participating, there's a large financial commitment that comes into play. In this way, the get, when it's actually given, is considered voluntary because no one was forcing them to give it. They're just deciding to give it in order to escape this large financial commitment that they've already accepted. And I think that this is an amazing, amazing example of how our community Rabbanim were able to approach a very challenging, really tough area of halacha within a framework that has been accepted by many, and to really, over time, significantly lower the rate of aguna cases. And I have a lot of hakar hatov to Rabbanim like Rabbi Willig, who really led the way in this area, Rabbi Mordechai Willig, and to organizations like ORA that launched campaigns that targeted shuls and schools and camps and basically had this slogan that friends don't let friends get married without a prenup, which was, based on the friends don't let friends drink and drive. Now in Israel, the situation is somewhat different. And I counter this with the kalot that we teach, because prenups here are not signed as, and they're not really part of the mainstream conversation here. And I think one reason is because the need is somewhat less, because here the Beit Din has a lot more power, so they have more tools at their disposal in order to help push forward a get. And it's also more halachically complicated to have a prenup, because since here the Beit Din, the religious court system, and the secular court system are all intertwined, it actually makes the the legal elements, more challenging. Over the past few years, though, there's been more and more talk of it in Israel. It's called a Heskem K'tam Nisuin, and there's a specific one that has been composed by Rav Elisha Aviner, and that rabbis who are connected to the Tzohar organization like to work with, called a Heskem Me'ahava, like an agreement out of love. And I think just the fact that we talk about these things and promote awareness about them and help couples realize that we're not saying anything about, their relationship or that we're concerned or suspicious or whatever, but as a community, we want to help promote a mechanism that could help all of us.
I just want to add there that, so when we got married 15 years ago, I didn't really come of age in the States. I learned about them here. I was in a lecture here in Hebrew about them by someone who, a woman from Efrat, who was very significant in making one of the agreements, not the one you mentioned from Tzar, but the Skem L'Kvod Hadadi. And we signed one. It was very important to me that we signed one. And we actually, as I mentioned in the previous episode, I was not part of the world where we were adding on things to the ceremony. That's not what we did. But we printed a really nice, beautiful little card. And next to all of the benchers on the tables, we put a very nice card that said that we signed a prenuptial agreement, and here's where you can learn more information. And I dafka, wanted it to be at, the tables with all the friends, because my husband went to what is considered to be a very mainstream, very, frum but open-minded yeshiva, and it's still today not at all mainstream for people to sign them. And I had wanted to sort of just put that out there, a little bit of awareness. So that was something we did then. Yeah, it was a little bit of a funky move, but I felt that it was important.
Good for you. All right. Onto the Badekin itself, that moment where, especially when you're on the women's side, you hear the band coming. Yeah. It's like, they're on their way, the Chatan, Odi Shama. So
we're there. Feel your heart beating along with the drums. So at this moment, right, we have the Badekin which is obviously a Yiddish word, right, where the bride's veil is going to be put over her face. It's really important to mention that many Sfaradim also don't necessarily have this minhag. And they don't have this sort of veiling ceremony. I would say that one place that we might have a sort of a source for the idea of being veiled might come from the story of Rivka when she first meets Yitzchak in Sefer Bereshit, and says right, that she sees him and she covers herself, and that might be an original source. We do know though that there were many centuries where women were not. We know that they were veiled when they got married, but we don't have any clear sources for
like a ceremonial.
Exactly, it wasn't this very clear ritual in the way that it's so clear to us today that we do that. The veil itself, not necessarily the ceremony, but the veil itself serves multiple functions, right? And there's a lot of different ways to sort of look at it. One might be that it's an element of tzniut, and this we actually already learned this. There's a Gemara in Ketubot, right, that speaks about the kalana avachasuda, and that we have a mitzvah to tell a bride, how beautiful she looks. It may be that the veil kind of developed as a way to sort of balance out the fact that on one hand, the woman, right, in her white dress is sort of like the center of attention, but on the other hand, it's not necessarily so comfortable. By the way, it's one of the reasons why I didn't want that the chair because I felt uncomfortable.
Don't be the center.
Yeah, I didn't want to be the center, and it wasn't something that and other people are waiting for that moment and they're so excited for it. But the veil might be this like very subtle element that comes to sort of temper that or balance that piece out. On one hand, we're the center of attention. On the other hand, we sort of have
or the
something.
concept like we say in Ishat Chayil of sheker hachin vehevel hayofi, meaning as beautiful as the kala is, and as much as we're going to praise her and her hair and her makeup and everything, at the end of the day, that's not really why this couple is getting married. It's not only about the externals. It's about something much deeper than that.
Yeah. And we want everyone to feel good about the way that they look, right, and the way that they are at the wedding, but we also want to preserve, as we said, a certain subtlety, right?
Yeah, there's a certain balance
exactly going on, in these very important moments. So one thing that's interesting about the veil also is about the transparency of it, right? So in, I would say, many of the weddings that we're going to, most of them, the veil is pretty transparent. And there's actually a halachic consideration for it being relatively transparent because the act of kiddushin, right, of actually becoming part of that union together, there is an importance to be able to see each other when that's happening.
What's going on.
Exactly. And also receiving the ring, right? There's actually halachic significance to being able to see and accept everything with full awareness. There is a very clear Hasidic minhag to have an opaque veil.
I've been at a couple weddings like that.
Exactly.
You have to make sure she could get up the steps of the chuppah
they have to really hold her that she doesn't fall down, right? And so that's a different kind of minhag, and I am certain that people who are marrying like that and women who have that experience, there's a whole range of experiences about how that feels. For some, it might be a nice feeling of feeling very private and that they have this moment to themselves.
And focus,
right? Instead of being distracted. So obviously there's different ways to look at all these different kind of customs that have developed surrounding the veil itself. So as I mentioned before, it's not necessarily totally clear how this actual ceremony developed. We know the idea of the veil, but not the actual veiling ceremony, so to speak. But there are some authorities who hold that covering the woman with the veil is actually like part of the chuppah, as part of sort of coming under this nisuin and coming under this canopy together. And therefore they actually require edim, witnesses, to see the husband do this.
I've seen that. Sometimes they're edi bedekin.
Exactly. So I see it less, but I know that I've seen it a few times.
There's certain like misajay kedushin that are very
that hold by this opinion. Exactly. Today, as we sort of already hinted to, this after not seeing each other for a week, or maybe even not speaking to each other for a week, right, and not taking pictures beforehand. So this is a very, very dramatic moment, right? And what's so interesting also, Shana, is the different sort of emotional tenor that couples choose to give to this moment, which, by the way, I also only met in Israel more. And it doesn't mean anything. I just left America when I was very young, okay? But we have some who like, it's exciting music all the way through, right? And high upbeat music. And you also have another version where the chatan comes and with this very, very upbeat music. And then as he comes and can see the kala, the music changes, right? It changes something much slower. If I just, again, split screen over to the Chabad community, they have the very important nigun of the Arba Bavot, which is a very considered like the most kadosh nigun that they have. Which is
very slow
and solemn.
And that's the whole badekin.
Exactly, the whole badekin. So different, couples
very
can
jarring
choose
when
different
you're used
ways.
to like the joyous one, and then you go to a wedding where it's like very solemn. You're like, wait, isn't this a happy moment? So it's interesting that also there's that mix sometimes, because it's like kind of trying to bring both elements into it.
Yeah, so I really like the mix, by the way. And then like you have the slower, and you have there, and again, certain places in Israel, the couple will sit together, and they'll sit together on the bench together, and they sometimes have a short conversation, sometimes a long conversation. The long conversations also happened well after I was married. But we have different versions of how this goes. I think also it's about that expectation, right? If you go to a wedding and you know that, they're going to have that nigun, so you have that expectation of what that moment is. I think that we see a variation of that in different kinds of weddings. I'll also just mention that for a second marriage, many only do the veiling at the chuppah itself, meaning they don't necessarily have the whole badekin ceremony, but it also really depends. There's almost like a different conversation needs to happen regarding second marriages, because there's a whole host of minhagim and different practices that can be different in that. At this moment, also another thing that's very, very meaningful. I actually sometimes think about it now for my own children, Bezrat Hashem, in many years. But you have now the brachot, right, that the parents bless the chatan and kala, their own child, their child who will become their own.
Moment.
Yeah, it's very, very, very beautiful.
And the grandparents sometimes, just very special.
Totally. And that is that ceremony, right? And so then we have the procession to the chuppah, and this is where we also have a very big difference based on what country you're living in. In Israel, it tends to continue to be lively, almost raucous, right? And they
really dance from the kisei kala right to the chuppah.
Dance the chatan there, and very often the kala is sitting there. Very often I've seen family and friends will come sing around her. They sing often even slower songs or singing to her until then she'll be, grabbed up and be escorted to the chuppah. I'll also just throw in that in Israel, especially in Yerushalayim, there's really a push to follow the Ashkenazi minhag that's brought down by the Ramah that the chuppah be held outside, right, under Kippat HaShamayim, underneath the stars. And that can also impact sort of the sense of like the formality of the moment, right? And how much is there energy that's like inside of a room and how much of it we're just like outside, and the energy kind of goes in all different directions. Another beautiful idea here that I really loved when I was learning for this is that sort of the idea of the procession, right? That you have people that are going to be escorting the Chatan and Kala to their chuppah is in many ways probably sourced in the Gemara in Eruvin, where we have their description that when it says in Sefer Bereshit, Ve've'ah el ha'adam, right, that the woman is brought to the man. It's essentially God was the first, attendant, right? He brought the first kala, right, to her chatan, and in that ways, that's sort of what's being reenacted by the parents, right, by all the friends who are flanking everybody and bringing them there, and by the community, exactly. And there also is an element here of like a monarchy, kind of like we have there chatan and kala, or like our melech and melka. Exactly. Like so that's king. Also the kind of the procession that's happening. I just want to add one other piece, Shana, because I think it's like this tiny moment that actually requires a lot of sensitivity, which is that sometimes at this exact moment is a sensitive spot for people who have either a non-traditional family structure or a parent or parents who have passed away, and a question like who's gonna walk down with them, right? Could be a very, very big question. And I think that there is a certain degree of consideration, like there's a certain preference in the halachic literature for it to be a married couple who walks them down, but that very often will have to be shifted to
especially when you have a divorced parents, and they each want to walk them down.
Yes,
sometimes they're remarried
with their own spouse. Exactly. Yeah. There's a lot here that needs a lot of sensitivity, and there is room for that in the conversation. I'll just also add a personal piece, which is that my sister got married almost 2 years ago. My father had already passed away, and I honestly didn't even know beforehand, but my mother and my brother walked her down the aisle, right? And that was what was chosen as being the right move for them, and for my sister. So that was something that it makes present the loss or the lack or the change that happened in the family, right? And so it's this very sensitive moment, and it's really, I'm sure couples think about this beforehand, but it's also, I think, a sensitivity to be aware of also as those who are present at the wedding.
And I've seen different things done. I've seen a sibling step in, as you're, giving an example of from your own family. And I've seen sometimes the parent that's left walking down their son or daughter alone. And there's no right way here. And there's no one thing that the halacha is demanding. And it's just whatever is going to help that chatan or kala feel good in that moment, because there's a lot of emotions going on here, and they have to be able to hold them all together. Like you're really feeling the loss of that parent, or
and you're about to create your family.
Yeah.
So like it's all that in the same moment.
And if there's a messy divorce, I've seen cases where sometimes the parents that are divorced, like it was really hard for them to walk down together, but this is their child, and that's what their child wanted, and there's a lot to navigate here. There is a minhag for whoever is escorting the chatan and the kala to the chuppah to each carry a candle. Now, sometimes the escorts are the kala's mother and father, or who's ever walking her down. Sometimes it's the mother of the kala and the mother of the chatan, and then the two fathers of, the father of the chatan, the father of the kala will go with the groom. And this minhag returns a little bit to what we said earlier from the Tashbetz of Matan Torah, that he says that maybe the candles are to signify the fact that the chuppah is reminiscent of that huge giving, occasion of the giving of the Torah, in which there were awesome lights and sounds, and the candles remind us of that. It definitely seems to be a very ancient custom. Some people say it's Matan Torah, others say it's because the word ner, I'm not so into gematria, but the word ner in gematria, the nun and the resh, has the numerical value of 250, and if you do 2 times that, you get to 500 for the 2 candles, and that's perhaps the sum of the limbs of a man, 248, and what we say are the limbs of a woman, 252, or some people say the gematria of 500 is Pru Revu, so that bracha of wanting this couple to be fruitful and multiply, which is something we wish for them as they begin their new home. It could be related to that. My parents did not walk down with candles at any of our weddings. It's not our minhag, but you do definitely see that a lot. There's also another minhag, an Ashkenazi minhag specifically, which is that many chatanim, when they get to the chuppah, they will don a kittel, which is that simple white garment that is worn typically by men on Yom Kippur. And the most widely cited explanation for this, again, connects to that Yom Kippur element and this feeling of like the chatan and kala just wanting to receive forgiveness for their past sins and to start fresh and to start new. So the white kittel is a reminder of the purity and the repentance and the spiritual renewal that we're associating with this special day and with the beginning of a new marriage. And it also reminds us of the white shrouds that we will see put on for a body at its burial, which is a very humbling thought. It's like, why at a wedding would we want to be thinking about that? But it reminds us of the humility with which we should approach marriage, and also that we hope that this marriage will last until the day we die. So there's that element. And there's also some people who think that white is a color of royalty, and going back to that idea that the chatan and kala are like a king and a queen, so it's befitting of them to be dressed in white, and the kala has her white dress, and now the chatan is in the kittel. But this is not a minhag you will see across the board, even though you will see it a lot. And for those who think that it's that royalty element, so it also makes sense that oftentimes the chatan doesn't put it on himself, like someone puts it on him, someone
they
helps
robe him.
Exactly. And then the kala comes, and when the kala comes to the chuppah, sometimes you'll see the chatan walk down to greet her and then enter the chuppah together with her. And then there's this other strong Ashkenazi minhag, which is not always done in Sephardi circles, which is for the kala to circle the chatan 7 times. And here too, there's different explanations that are given, but one that comes up is that is the number of times that Bnei Israel walked around the walls of Yericho before they came down. And I always thought of there's being something nice here and symbolic in the sense of like this new couple is entering a marriage where they don't want there to be any barriers between them. They kind of like want to take down all the things that might, be stopping them from connecting, or maybe stopping them from really being able to really fully embrace and accept the other person. You will see that in a lot of communities, the kala, when she does this circling of the chatan, she has her mother and her mother-in-law oftentimes walking behind her, either holding the chain of her dress or sometimes alongside her, holding her hands. But that's just has to do with, your taste and your preference. And I'll say that my own mother encouraged me to walk around alone because she thought that it's an intimate moment, and she thought there's something special about it just being the kala and the chatan alone, and she and my mother-in-law were okay with that. There's something very powerful about it, and it's something that a couple could consider, even though if it's something that's very important to someone's mother and mother-in-law, that's also something to weigh. I would never want somebody to hurt somebody in the process, but it's something to be discussed. And then just a few more things. Typically, the kala, if you pay attention, is almost always to the chatan's right. So I'm not exactly sure why. There's different minhagim about that, but that's most typically what you see. And there's also different minhagim about what direction the couple should face. So should they specifically face the crowd, or they should specifically maybe face away from the crowd so that they could focus more, or maybe Rav Soloveitchik held that they should face Mizrach. At my own wedding, we had our backs to the crowd, and part of that was because we had a very large wedding. My father was Rabbi Bashul, and they invited everyone. We had almost 1,000 people at our chuppah, and I think there was just this feeling of like, we want a little bit more privacy. And I remember my husband, when he turned to give the ring and say Aryeh Mikudesha, for the first time he glimpsed the crowd, and like you kind of see in the wedding video the shock almost that he experienced that at that moment. And also like American weddings, when I got married, even though it was that huge crowd, it was like totally silent, like we spoke about in last episode, like super formal. You could hear a pin drop in the room. There was a lot of respect like for the ritual, and there was something very meaningful about that. But there's also something meaningful, as we said last time, about the Israeli atmosphere of weddings, of like the crowd being totally drawn in and part of it, and all in good measure, all in good taste. When it gets too far off, it's not always good, but there's trade-offs and all these, and I guess one of the messages here is that there's not one right way for everyone. Part of what a couple has to think about along with their parents as they're thinking about the wedding is what tone they want to set. Sometimes also in Israel, I see weddings that are a little bit more, in that direction of a little bit more formal, and they want there to be seating for everyone, and everyone has to figure out what's right for them. In any case, the first thing that happens under the chuppah is typically the kiddushin, which is the first of the two stages that we really focused on in last episode, which are the two necessary stages in order to be considered halachically married, the kiddushin and the nisuin. And we're not going to go into detail here because we discussed all that, but just to quickly review the basic, the first thing that happens is that the Masada kiddushin is going to make a borei pri agafe and the bracha over the cup of wine, and then there's going to be the berkat erusin, which once in a while you'll see the chatan make it. As we said, that's the opinion of the Rambam. The chatan and kala will each then have a sip of the wine. The mother typically is given the glass to give the kala a sip from because it's an intimate, because it's an intimate act and they're not fully married. And yes, interesting that you say that because some specifically want to use red wine because they think that there's something preferable about that because it's the wine that was used in the mikdash and it's like used for ritual purposes or because it represents a certain like vitality of life. And some are like, no, white dress,
no stain dresses.
Yeah, we don't want any. Yeah, we don't want any stains. And also, some people think that white wine is a higher quality, so maybe it's better in any case. And then after that, the chatan is going to recite the line Harei at mikudeshet li b'tabat zo kedat moshav yishel, and he's going to give the ring to her in front of two kosher witnesses who are not related to the bride or groom or to each other. And then at this point, Mikudeshet. At this point, the couple is considered designated and sanctified, consecrated to each other, but forbidden to everybody else, and still not yet totally permitted to each other. For that, we have to wait for the nisuin.
Exactly, right? And we also mentioned last time, but it's important to mention it again now, that we perform these two parts together, right? The kiddushin and the nisuin, we perform them together. Rashi held that we should use two separate cups of wine, essentially, to keep each element distinct. And Tosfot says that there definitely needs to be some sort of break between them. And that is where we fill in today, right? The reading of the ketubah, and not because you have an obligation to read it. And so we have this as a strong custom. The Ramah says that that's the very strong custom. And indeed, today we see that as the very strong way that we separate between these two elements. As I mentioned earlier, in some communities, the ketubah is signed, right, at this juncture also. And before it's read. For others, a dvar Torah or a speech can be given now as well. And sometimes there's a translation of the ketubah, or it's read in a sort of oblique kind of way. Kind of we read a few sentences and skip over. I've seen also people do mostly rabbanim, right? Do really funny things in reading their ketubah. They'll add in funny lines, right? It could be a moment that also can add an interesting kind of like levity to the moment. The question of who reads the ketubah is not addressed extensively in early halachic literature, and in recent years there has been discussion about women reading the ketubah. We also mentioned this in our previous episode, and sort of part of like a broader drive to include women's voices more in the ceremony.
That in detail.
Exactly, we discussed it mamash in detail. At this moment, we're embarking upon the nisuin. Okay, we've passed the kiddushin, we've read the ketubah, and we are at this next part of the ceremony with the sheva brachot that we're going to say. There's a strong Sfaradi minhag for a man to put on a talit, and very often he wraps himself and puts it also around the kala. Okay, often there's also a strong minhag that the woman or her family buys a talit for the chatan.
Which adds to the meaning.
Exactly. It adds to the meaning of it. Exactly. In Israel, this has become very common custom, not just for Sephardi couples.
Yeah, it's kind of spilled over into the Ashkenazi world.
I don't know. I guess I don't see weddings anymore that don't have this.
To take the best that everyone has to offer.
Exactly. And so it's become very, very popular. And it's also a moment that's significant because we have, again, the kala and chatan are participating something together, right, at the chuppah, where there's often sort of, they do different things in that moment. And another piece that comes up here, and it's a halacha question that then relates to the talit, is the question of, hey, what about making the bracha of shechianu? Like, this is a really big occasion. If we make it on an apple, then we should make it on a wedding, right? So this is a very extensive halachic conversation. The vast majority of poskim, with just the exception of Rav Yaakov Emden, they all agree that you should not say shechianu at the wedding, and that ultimately the sheva brachot that we're going to say are much more specific brachot for this. Those are the brachot of the wedding. And so you don't say shechianu, which is a general bracha.
Right. We don't say it on the wedding itself.
Exactly. But how does this fit into the talit? Because very often what a chatan will do is that they will make a shechianu on the talit that they are putting on for the first time. And so for men, this is a lovely minhag. And what's important to also note is that often you might hear that the woman and the man are saying the bracha together. But the woman is not saying shechianu on the talit because it's not a garment that she's going to be wearing. But she could make the shechianu at the same time, having in mind the dress that she's wearing or perhaps the ring that she's receiving, right? Because whenever you have a significant new garment, you can make the shechianu. So that's why often you can hear that bracha being made, but they're in halachically not having the same kavanah, the chatan and the kala.
I mean, I say often in the weddings that we go to, because we go to certain types
I know,
of
it's
weddings.
a very certain type of wedding. I know.
Very like
I know.
niche part of the community. But at the weddings we go to, especially if a kala is looking for a way to be more of an active participant.
It's a moment she can find a space there. It's a moment
that she could also participate in. Yeah, but probably out in the broader world, not as often to hear a kala saying it.
But it's nice to hear that is a way that a woman can become part of it if someone wants some more ideas.
Yeah. Absolutely. And with that, we get to that second and really crucial stage of the ceremony, which is the nisuin. Here, too, I refer all of our listeners back to the previous episode, if you haven't listened to it now, because that's where we really discuss what is nisuin and what are the different interpretations of what constitutes nisuin and how it is performed. Primarily, it's the time, though, that the Sheva brachot are recited under the chuppah. And in addition to the 7 classic brachot, the Rambam in Hilchot Ishut writes that some also have this minhag to bring hadassim, to bring like the myrtle branches that we, are one of the daled minim from Sukkot, and that after the first bracha of hagafen is made, before the next 6 brachot of the Sheva brachot, they make a bracha on the besamim upon smelling them. And this is an ancient Sephardi minhag, which you will see sometimes at Sephardi weddings, especially of teimanim. And it could be that the connection is that since the wedding is this moment of like great simcha, and we believe that fragrance really enhances simcha and enhances the rejoicing of the chatan and kala, and also could be thought of as a way also of honoring them. It could be that is why they're making the bracha. Some also compare conceptually to the role that besamim play when we make Havdalah, when there's like a spiritual transition, the same way that we're making a transition from, the Kodesh to the whole. Here, a couple is entering into a new state. And I also once heard someone say, like in the Dor Holech v'Dor Ba, like almost like that, kind of generation, one generation, the parent generation is kind of moving aside and a new generation is taking its place, that there's something wonderful about that, but also always bittersweet in those moments. And maybe that the samim is there to like kind of give a little kick and a little bit of a sense of revival. But what I find overall interesting is that across the board on the Sephardi side, you'll see many kinds of minhagim here that place more emphasis on like the beauty and the joy and the excitement and, in this case, like the fragrance, whatever. And on the Ashkenazi side, there's a lot more connected to the Yom Kippur and the solemnity and the
I don't think this
seriousness.
is particularly surprising.
No, and it kind of fits with what we know are some of the differences between the two traditions, but both are, in essence, recognizing the profound, moment that we find ourselves in, but they express it in different ways.
Totally.
Yosef, I'm curious, like when it comes to the Sheva brachot, is there a specific bracha that stands out for you or that like speaks to you, or every time you're at a wedding, you're like, love that bracha?
Yeah, that's so easy, Shayna, the 7th bracha. Like also, just a shout out here, let's please ask people to have kibudim who can hold it well, and who can sing on key, and who can manage
that one's
to do
usually
it.
sung, the 7th
It's
one.
sung, especially in Israel. It's actually easier to do it because the whole crowd comes in with you,
and the
they
band
sing
helps
with you,
you
and the
out.
band helps you out. So there's a lot of help on that one. I know my brother; he really practiced on one a lot for my sister's wedding. He took it very, very seriously, and so in the States, often you could be left like singing alone, really. So you have to like it's more of a performance, exactly. So here I love the fact that it's sort of just lively and everyone joins in and you're all ready to sing, and exactly, and the whole bracha that asher bara sason v'simcha chatan v'kala gila rina ditza v'chedva ahava v'achava v'shalom v'reut, right? All of these beautiful things that we're wishing our chatan and kala and the happiness together and their companionship. Meira Hashem Elokeinu yishama b'arei Yehuda u'v'chutzot Yerushalayim, and this is lifted from Yirmiyahu, the 33rd chapter of Yirmiyahu. Kol sason v'kol simcha, kol chatan v'kol kala, kol mitzalot chatanim מחופתם ונערים ממשתה נגינתם ברוך אתה השם משמח חתן עם הכלה. And here I just want to mention that in this bracha, where we mentioned this a little bit last time, we go into sort of like a broader look at all of Am Yisrael, right? We're looking at everybody. We want to have this bracha for everybody in Am Yisrael, for everybody in here in Yehuda, because that's Yirmiyahu speaking to.
No, because the bracha is hoping like for Gula, and a time when we're going to be able to really like rejoice in the sounds of weddings.
Exactly. And I think that in that moment, by the way, and many people use this time to daven for, for a spouse, for themselves, for the people who need it, right? Some people come with lists of tefillot to say at weddings, and it's a really significant moment, right? When we're like celebrating this couple, and we're also, please God, praying for everybody who can stand in.
It's good you're throwing
moment.
that in, because we didn't really mention that the kisei kala, one of the things that the kala is often doing.
All of those tefillot, right? The list of tefillot, she could say that at the
people
mincha
who need
tefillah
children,
as well.
or people are looking for a spouse, people who need a refuah shlema, the psuim, those injured in the war, all kinds of things like that.
So that's specifically the kala, and I feel like as a member of the wedding, meaning as being in the audience, that's a moment that I, daven for those in my family, or close friends, and that's something that
specifically in this bracha.
Yeah, in that bracha, or also just throughout the chuppah. Sometimes people will give out a tefillah, right? They give it a tefillah that you could say. I like that as well.
Yeah.
What about you, Shayna?
So I particularly appreciate the sixth bracha, where we say Sameach Tisamach Reim Ahuvim Kesamechacha Yitzircha Began Eden Mikadem. We ask Hashem to make the beloved friends joyful as you made your creation happy in Gan Eden, in the Garden of Eden. And I always think about something that I once read in the Sefer Ish V'Isha, or the marriage covenant by Rabbi Elyashiv Knohl, where he asked, like, why are we specifically asking that Hashem make them happy like he made his creations in Gan Eden? Like, what was going on in Gan Eden that was like so wonderful, specifically as it relates to a marriage? And what he says is that what was so amazing about the partnership of Adam and Chava in Gan Eden is that they had total clarity. Like, they didn't have to walk around thinking, is there someone out there better for me? Maybe, the next guy would have had all this and also played the guitar. Maybe, sorry, that's my example. But anyway, meaning they were able to have that understanding that, like, this person was literally created for me. And there's a certain simcha, there's a certain happiness that comes when we don't have doubts. And that's in essence what we are hoping for the couple, that when they stand under the chuppah, they could be at peace with their decision, and they could have that happiness of, like, doesn't matter who else is out there, doesn't matter, what other resume somebody sent me, or what other idea someone may have thought. Like, I feel really at peace and happy with this partnership, with this marriage that I'm entering into. And this idea reminds me of something that my sister Hudi shared at my own Shava Brachot. She was not married at the time, and it was such a powerful Dvar Torah that it has stayed with me for these last 24 years, and I've shared it many times. But she basically quoted an explanation that she heard on a Gemara in Masechet Yevamot, which is a really strange Gemara, because the Gemara says that in Marava, in Eretz Yisrael, when a man would get married, they would come to him and they would say, so, what's up? What kind of marriage do you have? A marriage of matzah or a marriage of motzeh? And what they were referring to is that there's these different psukim. One that says, matzah isha matzah tov. I found a woman and I found happiness. I found goodness. I found, I found everything I needed. And one that says, motzeh ani mar mimavet et haisha. That I have found, this woman, I have found my wife, like, more bitter than death. And basically they were saying, how's it going? Right. What kinds of marriage do you have? And I remember my sister said, like, it's so strange. What's going on here? Did they actually ask him this? And, like, what are they getting at? And what she quoted, and I don't remember in whose name it was in, so I'm sorry that I can't give credit there. But what she said is that the whole difference is in the tense. That if you approach marriage and you think of it as matzah, I found something in the past. I made a decision and I feel good about the decision. And I am all in and I accept my spouse for who they are with all their strengths and all their weaknesses. And I remember all the time, like, why I made that decision in the past. And now I'm just focused on building and strengthening and making this relationship as good as it could be. Then matzah tov. Then be'emet, you're going to be tov, you're going to be good, you're going to be happy, you're going to be at peace. But if you're constantly looking at your decision in the present, motzah, and you're saying, was that good? Should I have chosen differently? Should I have ended it? You're re-examining and you're questioning and you're doubting anew each day. And you're always thinking, like, oh, maybe there's something else that could have been different or better or whatever. And indeed, we live in a world where, like, we're very, involved and integrated with other people, and especially in the communities that we're in. You could go to Shabbos, you could be like, ooh, that person is funnier than my spouse, or that person is sharper, or that person is whatever it is. And then you could go home, you could think like, oh no, what does that mean? And that actually could be a very bitter way to live. And just to remind ourselves that no, like, that clarity of when you chose somebody, like, that we want you to be to know that I marry this person because they are the right person for me. And it doesn't matter if they're the best, we're not marrying someone because they're are number one in all areas. We're marrying someone because we think that this person is somebody that could, be a good fit and a good partner for me. And then that will really help us stay in a place both of simcha and of tov. So I really, really appreciate that idea, and I feel it connects to the sixth bracha. What is left now under the chuppah, down to the last little thing?
We've likely said the brachot, but we have now the singing of Imeshkachech and the breaking of the glass, which we're going to talk about the relationship between those two. And most do this after the Sheva Brachot, but there are some who do it before. Okay, but the most of the weddings, certainly that I've seen, it's done after that. And this is really the closing piece of the chuppah. Now, the source of this breaking of the glass is from the Gemara in Brachot in Laman Aleph, Amud Aleph, where it says that Rav Ashi made a wedding for his son, and he saw that the rabbis were celebrating with a lot of levity, and he brought an expensive cup. It says a white glass, okay, and he breaks it before them, and they suddenly became much more somber. Now, what's interesting is that this story is not cited as having any connection to Imeshkachech.
To the mikdash.
To the mikdash. It's not in a list of mourning practices. It's not part of that. It's part of a whole series of stories about sort of environments that were too frivolous, and that like ways that we sort of toned them down. But Tosfot here says that this is the source for breaking the glass at weddings afterward, meaning it's from this space. The minhag that is often performed more so in Israel than outside of Israel, and that is overtly connected to a mourning practice for the Beit Mikdash, is putting ashes on the head of the chatan. It can be placed in the kala's head. I haven't seen it so often. Again, I think it's like one of those procedure over ritual. Like, we don't want to get dirty, right? So maybe don't put it on our heads. And so it's, again, not universally practiced. It's less common in Sephardi communities. So again, we see this in different kinds of ways. But I will just say that there's also creativity in terms of like what the ashes are from, right? There are those who will bring from Gush Katif, I saw, in certain moments, or from Har HaBayit, or from the Otef Aza, right? Meaning the sort of like the Gazan border. There have also been different tweaks that people use here. They might use their friend's cup, or they use a talit, going back to the talit from before, from a friend, or maybe they use this moment for who was killed, or they use this moment for tefillot. Like, meaning I've seen all different versions or ways that people have sort of taken this moment of remembering the destruction, meaning of the Beit Mikdash, but also weaving in sort of like modern moments of shever, of like brokenness in this moment.
Or like tapping into that national element in all different kinds of ways.
Some couples choose to break the cup in the middle of the singing because they don't want to have the whole of, sing the song, break cup, Mazel Tov, because it kind of defeats the purpose of why it is that we're breaking the glass. And instead of it could be perceived as like, this is the threshold into your new life, when really it's supposed to be remembering the Beit Mikdash.
Yeah, that breaking of the cup has become like the sign of the
you can say Mazel Tov now. And so some choose to do it in the middle so that you can have like the full moment and the full singing of whatever songs you're doing. People have added songs. People have sung different versions of Imeshkachech. There's a lot of different practices that people add in here. An idea that I was told in the name of Rabbanit Hadassah Fruman from Tkoa is, sometimes this Mazel Tov, sometimes it's even said in the middle of the song when you're still in the middle, because people are sort of just like instinctually used to saying that, right? Or even the fact, if we do have the singing, glass breaking, and then saying Mazel Tov, that one way that you could look at that is sort of the idea that from within something that is broken, a new home is being created, right? And in that way, maybe it's akin to Rabbi Akiva, and we mentioned this in an earlier episode, Rabbi Akiva seeing in Tzviat Omer, right? Of Rabbi Akiva seeing the foxes that are running on Har HaBayit, or the destroyed Har HaBayit, and being able to see the future, that something here will be built. So it is that kind of moment that you look inside something that is painful, but then are able to look at the beauty of a home that's being built, and that is something that creates joy out of something that was and still is painful to a certain degree. I think that in the most basic sense at this moment, I always just think about the fact that we can hold many things at once.
We keep coming back to that on
this
podcast.
We do come back to that. It's a life truth.
I was thinking, it's come up in many different episodes. Yes. Just, I guess that's life, and especially life in Israel right now.
What
we're
this
just holding so many different things all the time.
But this minhag demands of us to recognize that, right? Yeah. Why else bring in the Beit Mikdash and all of these happy moments, right? So I think that that's a really important piece. And I think also we sort of hinted at a little while ago, but this idea of like the individual national story, right? Meaning we're getting married, we have this beautiful life that we're creating together, but we're part of a broader story.
Our person of simcha, but it's not only that.
Exactly. It's something much, much bigger.
Yeah. And that's it. I mean, from
Mazal
there,
tov.
Mazal tov. From there, Ashkenazi couples are danced off to the Yichud room where they're going to spend their first few moments alone as a married couple. This is not just like a nice, intimate space. Many people think that this is a huge part of the fulfillment of Nisuin because this is where they're demonstrating that they're married and they're now permitted to be secluded alone together. Not all Sephardim, though, have this practice of going to a Yichud room, even though some will still take the opportunity to have some personal and private time together, but they don't view it as part of the halachic process. And something that I like to tell couples when I meet with them just about the Yichud room and in general is that I always share that in life, we very much see that happiness is often tied to expectations. So when we have an expectation and it's met, it's like, yay, that's exactly what I was hoping for, and I feel good and I feel content. But when we have an expectation and for some reason it's not met, we could feel sad, disappointed, frustrated, even angry if like there's, someone that we feel like is responsible for why it didn't happen. And I want a couple, and this is really one of the main things I have in mind when I'm teaching them, like I want them to be able to feel as joyful and as happy and as good as possible, specifically like at their wedding and like also in like the days and weeks following that. And a lot of that is dependent on them being able, first and foremost, to be honest with themselves, meaning each one with themselves about like, what are my expectations? Do I have expectations? Sometimes you don't even realize that you have an expectation until it doesn't happen. Then like, what went wrong, So to take a few moments to think about what are my expectations and then to share them with each other. And the reason that I'm bringing it up around the Yichud room is because I've seen situations where sometimes people don't realize that they have an expectation, such as it could be that they're coming to the Yichud room and they got a very special present for their new spouse. They didn't stop to think about, am I expecting one in return? And then the other person doesn't come with one because that's not what they were thinking about. Or one person wrote a card. And if you write a card and you're like, I just want to express myself and give the card and I'm not expecting anything in return and you're honest about that, that's great. But if you haven't stopped to think about if you are, then that could be something that could be disappointing and hard. And also when we talk about a new couple and we talk about a couple that is entering, the first moments of marriage, and there's also like a physical connection that is beginning here. So I think there's also a part there where I always like people to think through expectations. And overall, I'm a fan of like maybe a little bit less spontaneous and a little bit more like thoughtfulness and intentionality could help you overall be really, really, really happy and satisfied.
Stop there. Marriage advice in general. Spontaneity is
overrated.
Is overrated and really not helpful.
Because I want to say this in a few respects, okay? There's a moment, like you just said, Mazel Tov, right? So there's that moment under the chuppah where everyone says Mazel Tov and the band starts off playing. And sometimes you'll see that like one of the new spouses turns to the other with like a huge smile and the other one's already hugging their mom. And you're like, like speak, like, should we turn to each other? Or one spouse is like sure that they're going to hold hands as they leave the chuppah. And maybe sometimes some people think there's also halachic elements that on either side. Some people think that the couple should dafka hold hands leaving the chuppah as a sign that they're not married. Some people think, no, we're not so into the public displays of affection. But either way, you want them to be on the same page about this. And imagine if like one person thinks that they're going to give the other a big hug under the chuppah and the other one is thinking like, no, not here, not now, in front of everybody. These things could lead to a lot of just not pleasant feelings and discomfort and also frustration and sometimes hurt. And I really think that a conversation of like, hey, let's talk about what's going to happen under the chuppah. Let's talk about those first few moments in the Yichud room are things that can really, really, really help a couple kind of emerge from those first few moments of marriage in a feeling of just like, wow, that was great. Not because we're planning out at 10 seconds, at 20 seconds, at 30 seconds. I'm not talking about that. Hope everyone understands that. But just so that there's a picture overall. Or if your fiance says to you, I always imagined X, and you're like, oh, okay. Like, actually, I never thought about that. So let's talk it through. I think those are things that could just help them feel good as they head out to the su'udah, to the meal, and to the dancing.
I'm really happy you said that, Shana, because I feel like I have never said that in any clear way to my couples, and I'm kind of regretting it right now, but I'm at least happy that from now on we can have this episode to think about that. It's a really, really important piece. And some couples, even without planning, would just get through that fine, but it's really, really important for all of those who
I don't want to risk it.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Totally. That's a really, really good piece of advice. I appreciate hearing that. So after this, we have the meal, right? We have the Sudat Mitzvah, and we, wash and are going to participate in. And that, ideally, the Chatan and Kala are going to wash and participate in their own Sudat Mitzvah. By the way, I'll say, my husband and I basically forgot to eat.
I also did. That's so funny. I couldn't even bench at my own wedding.
Definitely
I washed
couldn't.
in the Yichud room,
Yeah.
but then by the time we got to bench, I'm like, I didn't really eat anything. So Judah benched and had me in mind.
I recall that we weren't fasting, so I wasn't starving. Do you know what I'm saying? Because it was Rosh Chodesh, and I did not eat. I was super active and zen, hosting.
So you are supposed to eat, and you
Yes.
are supposed to participate in the Birkat Hamazon of your own wedding.
Exactly. After the meal, right, we're going to have a special Birkat Hamazon. We have a special zimun, right? In addition, just like at a Brit Milah, we have a special zimun, right? We have special moments with additions to the zimun. We're also going to have the Sheva Brachot that are also recited. Another good little tip to have is that we have someone in charge, right, of who's getting what kibudim, to make sure that those who are, a lot of times people get up and leave, so all of a sudden, Uncle Harry cannot be there anymore. And
you want to make sure that either people who are getting it know to stay, or that you only ask people who are staying.
Exactly, and then no one gets insulted, right? Oh, that is very much a possibility. So it's maybe a good idea to have someone kind of in charge of that, of the kibudim that are given out for the Sheva Brachot. And I'll also just say that it is customary to have the celebration continue for a whole week. Perhaps it's also akin to creation. We see all over Tanakh the idea that we have a mishteh for 7 days. And at every one of these special meals, right, you're going to have the same process of the special zimun and also other Sheva Brachot. And ideally, we have a minyan of men, okay, that are present at these meals. And also, in addition, we have one new guest, the Panim Chadashot, who are, in order to be able to recite the Brachot, you need that additional new guest, except on Shabbat. The Shabbat is considered to be the special guest. And then you can also say these Brachot, and you can say the Hagafen at the end after all the Brachot are said. Now, it's also important to note, though, that as long as you do have 3 adult men present, right, other than the immediate household, meaning 3 additional guests, okay, that you can still make the special zimun, and you can also say the bracha of Asher Bara, right, and say the Hagafen, which is also significant.
Your favorite.
What?
Your favorite one.
Exactly, my favorite long bracha. And what's also interesting to know is that Rav Henkin, Zichrono Livracha, was also of the opinion that if there are 3 women present, that they could also do the same, for the same reason women can make zimun, right? Remember that episode? So they could
could do the special zimun. Wow.
They could do the special zimun, and they can also make the bracha.
Nice.
And
that's important, because we work in a midrash, so sometimes there really are gatherings during that week where
Totally.
it's mostly women and there isn't a minyan.
And also super important to remember, Shana, is that people don't need to have Shabbat Brachot every single night.
This is not a halacha.
It's not a halacha. It's lovely if it's lovely, meaning I think a good idea to think about maybe sometimes is maybe taking off maybe the day after the wedding.
Well, just to clarify, because the halacha is that if you have a gathering
you have a gathering, you have to make these
to celebrate the
brachot.
chatan and kala, and there's a minyan, then you have to make these brachot, but not that you have to make
you
a
don't
gathering
have
in
to
order
create
to
it.
say
Exactly. And sometimes it can put a lot of pressure on the couple, and sometimes it's a stressful schedule, or maybe even they're running off to the army. That's a version we've seen a lot here, right? But meaning sometimes they just need a little bit of space, and it's not always right for them. And so it's important to remember that you don't have to make this meal if you don't want to.
Yeah,
and it's one of these weeks where you have to you have to balance between what the parents really want to do and the friends who want to honor, and all those pieces, but also to remember that it's okay to take some space and take a break also.
Yeah, I think that's an important piece, because there's some couples that love it, and some they just know themselves and they know that it will not be good for them to have one of these,
it was
big
totally hard for me, by the way,
night.
but I didn't have as much self-awareness to say that I didn't want to have them.
Okay, this was a long episode, but I am hopeful that this episode really will be helpful, that it will be a guide to couples who could sit and listen to together and really think together about all these different aspects of the wedding that we just ran through. And I thought that instead of our regular takeaways where we think about an aspect of our discussion that really spoke to us, maybe instead of that we could share some of our best marriage advice. Some of it was maybe came out as we were going along, but Yosefa, what do you got? What do you have to offer us?
So first of all, I just want to say that this piece of advice is important to me, because obviously I need to use it in my own life. Yeah. So this is coming from the heart, genuinely. Okay. I'm speaking to myself as well. First of all, I'll just say that in general, anything from the Gottman Institute in my mind is gold. Great material. John and Julie Gottman are the heads of that institute, and they're really been pioneers for the past, 3.5 decades in marital research. And so I'll just go with one piece that is something that I always think about, also because it's easy to remember because it has a number, which is what they call the 5-to-1 rule. And this is great for a married couple. It's great for parenting even. But the idea that we should try and have 5 times as many positive statements for every one negative statement, okay, that we make. Criticism is really easy to give. It tends to multiply as the years progress. And it's really, really important to remember that people mostly need to hear good things. And they need to hear those good things so that it can balance out, support, and soften and enable them to receive, right, when there's actual criticism that's really warranted. And to me, the flip side of this whole piece about criticism is the concept of ayin tova. That's how I hear also therapists defining it here in Israel. But it sort of means to have a kind eye, in the sense that we often can look at a scenario and kind of like assume the worst. Okay, they were not responsible, or they didn't see me, or right, or they, were only focused on that thing and not, the thing that we wanted to focus on. But ayin tova doesn't mean ignore reality. It doesn't mean that, but it means try and see the best possible version of what the scenario could be. Or sometimes it even means try and adapt the way that, the spouse is looking at the scenario, to be able to see, maybe we don't have to agree with it, but be able to see how they were perceiving the situation. Again, to me, this is human advice. It's super important in a marriage, but it's important in every context of every relationship. And sometimes it's just the hardest to really apply within a marriage, sometimes when we assume that the other should be able to get something. So this piece about ayin tova is like, take a breath, stop for a minute, think about the scenario in a better way, and often we can really temper the way we respond to things. These to me are, because they're things that I always also need to remind myself, I think are 2 pieces of advice that are really part of the same package in my perspective.
I love that. And I'll say on that something that Judah, my husband, likes to say to me sometimes is, he's like, Shana, when 2 people are married, and thank God they're in a good marriage, like we are, he's like, it can't be that we are ever intentionally trying to hurt each other. Right. He's like, so if something's not feeling good, it's got to be that there's a miscommunication, or that someone has a different perspective, or that we're coming from a different place or a different angle, whatever it is. And let's figure out what that is. But it very much is that same idea of the ayin tova, and taking a step back and assuming that there has to be some other way of understanding this. So I very, very much appreciate that. I want to, I guess, just add one tip that I come back to often, which is that sometimes when you're getting married, you're told, never go to sleep angry. And I think that is terrible advice, because sometimes when it's 1:00 in the morning and you've just had a fight and no one is at their best and everyone is exhausted, that is not the time.
Life gets dramatic at 1 a.m.
That is not the time to try to work it out. And a lot of times when you wake up in the morning, things just seem completely different. You sleep on it and your brain has a way of making connections. What I do think is that you could kind of give each other a hug, or not even, or just be like, wow, we are not in a good place, but we love each other, and we'll know that somehow we'll work this through, even though I am so angry at you right now, whatever it's feeling. And then find a time when you're calmer and you're rested, or maybe even when there's been some space that you could talk about it. And in general, I just want to really, really encourage couples to communicate and to not let things build up, because I think sometimes that idea of don't go to sleep angry is don't just shove things under, the rug and ignore them. So it doesn't have to be in the middle of the night when it happens, but this idea of communicating, and if something went on, at some point we have to find the time to talk about it. And also, I just more and more and more, I am just beginning to have such a deep appreciation of how those first 18 years of our upbringing, they really, really, really shape us and mold us in very deep ways. And a lot of times, in ways that you don't even really understand sometimes, the miscommunications or the differences, whatever, come back to just things that are part of who we are at a very, exactly. I was going to say that, at our very core level, at what you're calling wiring, and getting to that place of understanding, which sometimes you could do on your own, and sometimes you might need the help of a professional, helps us to learn a lot about ourselves and about our partners, about our spouses, in ways that will help us continue to appreciate each other and really respect each other. So taking an attitude of just we always just want to be the best versions of ourselves, and also the best version of this partnership that we can. And we're not going to be mivater. We're not going to give up on that. We're going to keep working at it until somehow we're able to figure this out, is something that I think ends up, even though it's hard and sometimes exhausting and tiring to always be communicating, I think it is the key to having a really, really strong foundation. So b'hatzlacha, mazal tov to all the
Mazal
couples
tov,
that are
mazal
getting
tov.
married out there, and to all the people that attend weddings and, could have more of an understanding of why sometimes we see different things. I hope that this episode will also be useful and helpful in that way. Thanks for
Shana.
listening.
Did this conversation move you or cause you to think about the topic in a new way? Please share these episodes with friends and family and start conversations about meaningful mitzvah observance. You can contact us with thoughts and questions, or if you'd like to sponsor an episode at womentalkingmitzvot@gmail.com. Looking forward to our next conversation.